My parents sold my $5,000 gaming PC, the one I worked so hard to build, to fund my sister's shopping spree. So I moved out from them forever. It's strange how small things define us. For me, it was a computer. Not just any computer, though, the one I spent 2 years building, upgrading, and perfecting. Every component was chosen with care, every dollar earned from odd jobs and late-night freelancing poured into it. I named it Titan. It wasn't just a machine, it was my escape, my pride, and my independence. I'm James, a 19-year-old gamer and tech enthusiast. While other guys my age spent their time at parties or dating, I was glued to my desk, streaming games, tweaking software, and even learning to code. Titan wasn't just a PC, it was a dream machine worth over $5,000. Every wire, every LED strip was a testament to my dedication. It was my world. At home, things were different. My younger sister Melissa had a way of commanding attention without trying. At 17, she had our parents wrapped around her finger. Melissa was the golden child, always in the spotlight, whether it was her flawless grades or her spot on the cheerleading squad. Our parents treated her as if she could do no wrong. Meanwhile, my achievements felt like background noise. Sure, they said they were proud of me, but it was Melissa who got the newest phone, the surprise trips, the endless praise. I learned to live with it. I had Titan, and that was enough. Until it wasn't. That day started like any other. I'd been at my part-time job all afternoon, stocking shelves and dealing with cranky customers. The plan was to come home, fire up Titan, and lose myself in the latest game release. But when I walked into my room, something felt wrong. The desk was bare. My monitors, keyboard, mouse, gone. Panic hit like a truck. I tore through the house, searching for answers. My parents were in the living room, sipping coffee as if everything was normal. I couldn't believe the words coming out of their mouths. They had sold Titan. Just like that. No warning, no discussion. The reason? Melissa needed designer clothes for some gala or event, and apparently, my computer was the easiest way to fund her fashion statement. My head spun. Years of work, late nights, and sacrifices erased in a single, thoughtless decision. And the worst part? The way they dismissed my anger. To them, it wasn't a big deal. You can always save up and build another one, they said. Melissa didn't even look guilty. She was too busy twirling in her new outfit, her smile radiating entitlement. I'd always known I came second to her, but this felt different. It wasn't just favoritism. It was outright disregard for who I was, for what mattered to me. They didn't just sell a computer, they sold my independence, my escape. Titan was my sanctuary, and now it was gone. The betrayal cut deeper than I could put into words. I sat in my empty room that night, staring at the blank space where Titan used to be. A part of me wanted to scream, to storm out, to never come back. But another part of me, the quieter, angrier part, started plotting. They might not have cared about what they'd done, but I wasn't going to let it slide. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. After a restless night, the sting of betrayal settled into something sharper, determination. I needed to confront them, to make them understand what they'd taken from me. Early the next morning, I sat down with my parents. I laid it all out, the hours I'd worked, the sacrifices I'd made, the dreams tied to that machine. But my words seemed to hit a wall of indifference. They didn't see it the way I did. To them, it was simple. Titan was a luxury, not a necessity. My mom leaned into her usual line about family needs coming first, and my dad nodded along, echoing her sentiment. They couldn't understand why I was making such a big deal over what they saw as just a computer. It got worse when Melissa joined the conversation. She barely even looked at me, instead scrolling through her phone as if the whole thing bored her. When she finally spoke, her words were like salt in an open wound. She dismissed Titan as a nerd toy and claimed her appearance at the gala was far more important than my obsession. She even laughed when I mentioned how much time and effort I'd put into building it. The more they talked, the more I realized they weren't going to see reason. My parents viewed it as a necessary sacrifice, and Melissa didn't care at all. That's when something inside me shifted. I'd been quiet for too long, too willing to let things slide. Not this time. I decided I wasn't going to let them walk all over me anymore. I spent the next few days digging through my records, gathering everything I could to prove what Titan had cost me. Every receipt, every invoice for parts, every payment I'd made to get it running. I even found the documentation for the warranty and a few emails with customer support from when I was troubleshooting issues. It was all there, a timeline of my efforts and the value of what had been taken from me. As I pieced it together, I started to see a way forward. They might not respect my feelings, but they couldn't ignore the facts. What they'd done wasn't just unfair, it was illegal. They'd sold something that belonged to me, something I'd worked for and paid for. In the eyes of the law, it was theft. The idea of taking legal action against my own family felt extreme, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. They needed to understand the gravity of what they'd done. This wasn't just about Titan anymore, it was about respect, about standing up for myself. When I brought it up to them, the reaction was predictably explosive. My mom accused me of being dramatic, while my dad tried to guilt-trip me about tearing the family apart. Melissa's response was even colder. She rolled her eyes and said I was being pathetic. But I didn't back down. I showed them the documentation, laid out the costs, and told them exactly what their actions meant. I'll never forget the look on their faces when I said the word theft. For the first time, they looked shaken. I didn't threaten them outright, but I made it clear that I had options. I could go to the police, take them to small claims court, or even post about it online. The idea of public embarrassment seemed to hit them harder than anything else. They tried to reason with me, throwing out excuses about how families stick together and how things like this shouldn't come between us. But I'd heard it all before, and I wasn't buying it. If they wanted to fix this, they'd have to do more than talk. They'd have to make it right. By the end of the conversation, the balance had shifted. For the first time in years, I felt like I had some control. They might not have apologized yet, but I could see the cracks forming in their defenses. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I had the upper hand now, and I wasn't going to let it go. It didn't take long for the anger to come. My parents, furious at my accusations, threw everything they could at me, guilt trips, lectures about family loyalty, and even veiled threats about how I was teaching Melissa the wrong lessons. But I didn't flinch. I'd already lost too much to back down now. The next morning, my dad handed me an envelope with $1,200 in cash. He said it was all they could give me, the exact amount they'd gotten for selling Titan. His tone was final, like this should put an end to the whole situation. But looking at that money, I felt another wave of anger. Titan wasn't just about the price tag. It was about the hours, the craftsmanship, the care I'd put into building it. And $1,200 didn't even come close to covering its worth. Still, I saw an opening. I asked for the contact information of the buyer, and after some reluctant grumbling, they handed it over. It wasn't hard to reach out and explain the situation. The man who'd bought Titan turned out to be surprisingly reasonable. He was an older guy who had picked it up for his son, and when I told him about what had happened, he sympathized. He agreed to sell it back to me for the same $1,200, as long as I came to pick it up within the week. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of relief. At least Titan wasn't gone forever. But the feeling didn't last. As I sat in my room, staring at the empty space where my PC had been, I realized this wasn't just about getting my computer back. The deeper issue was my family. Their actions had shown me exactly where I stood. They didn't respect me, my efforts, or my independence. And I knew now they never would. With the $1,200 my parents had given me, I contacted the buyer and arranged a time to collect Titan. Borrowing a friend's car, I drove out to the buyer's house. Seeing Titan again was surreal. It felt like reuniting with a lost piece of myself. As I loaded it into the car, I couldn't help but feel a small sense of victory. But that victory was overshadowed by the reality waiting for me back home. When I returned, the tension in the house was unbearable. My parents barely spoke to me, and when they did, it was curt and dismissive. Melissa, as usual, acted like nothing had happened. She flaunted her new designer clothes and even made snide comments about how I overreacted. It was clear to me then that nothing was going to change. They didn't see what they'd done as wrong. To them, I was the problem. That's when I made my decision. I couldn't stay in this house any longer. Every moment here felt suffocating, like a reminder of how little they valued me. I started making plans to leave. It wasn't going to be easy, I didn't have much saved up, and the idea of striking out on my own was terrifying. But staying wasn't an option anymore. I'd rather struggle on my own than keep living in a place where I was constantly undermined. By the end of the week, I'd packed up what little I owned. Titan was back on my desk, but it felt like a symbol now, a reminder of why I needed to move forward. My parents didn't seem to care much about my decision. If anything, they seemed relieved to have one less hassle to deal with. Melissa barely noticed, too busy posting selfies in her new outfit. Leaving wasn't just about escaping them. It was about finding myself again, about reclaiming the independence they'd taken from me. As I closed the door to my room one last time, I felt a strange mix of sadness and hope. I was walking away from the only home I'd ever known, but I was also stepping towards something better. Whatever came next, I knew I wouldn't let anyone take it from me again. Moving into my own place was both thrilling and terrifying. The apartment wasn't much, a small, one-bedroom unit with faded wallpaper and a kitchen that could barely fit a microwave, but it was mine. For the first time, I could breathe without the weight of my family's judgments and manipulations pressing down on me. I left a note on the kitchen table before I left. It wasn't long, just a few lines explaining why I couldn't stay. I didn't want a dramatic goodbye or another round of guilt-tripping arguments. I just wanted out. It didn't take long for the messages to start flooding in. At first, they were furious. My mom accused me of being selfish and abandoning my family. My dad's tone was more practical but still cutting. He demanded I come back and fix things like an adult. Neither of them acknowledged their role in pushing me to this point. Instead, their words dripped with manipulation, trying to make me feel guilty for standing up for myself. Melissa, predictably, stayed silent. I doubted she even cared. In her mind, I was just being dramatic and would eventually crawl back. She'd always been the center of their attention, and my absence didn't change that. She kept posting pictures of herself online, flaunting the life they'd built around her, as if nothing had happened. But I didn't respond to any of them. I couldn't. Every message felt like a chain trying to drag me back to that toxic house. I'd spent years trying to earn their respect, to prove my worth, and all it got me was a constant reminder that I would never come first. This was my chance to break free, and I wasn't going to let them pull me back. Setting up Titan in my new apartment was like reclaiming a part of myself. The desk was small and wobbly, the chair wasn't much better, but seeing my PC light up again filled me with a sense of accomplishment. It was a reminder of what I could achieve on my own. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't have to justify my passions or defend my choices. This space was mine, and it reflected who I was. Life on my own wasn't easy. The bills added up fast, and the fridge often looked emptier than I liked. But every struggle felt worth it because it was mine. I picked up extra shifts at work and started freelancing again to make ends meet. My evenings were spent streaming games and working on small coding projects, slowly building the life I'd always dreamed of. Occasionally, I'd think about my family and wonder if they'd ever truly understand why I left. Part of me hoped they would, that one day they'd reach out with genuine remorse instead of guilt-laden messages. But deep down, I knew better. They'd never see things from my perspective. Melissa's comfort and image would always come first, and I'd always be the outsider. Accepting that was painful, but it was also freeing. By the time I'd finished setting up my apartment, I felt a newfound sense of clarity. This was the life I wanted to build, one where I didn't have to fight for validation or compete for scraps of attention. I could focus on my passions, on creating something meaningful, without the constant noise of their disapproval. When I sat at Titan in my new place, the hum of the PC felt like a fresh start. The past still lingered, but it no longer defined me. I was free to carve out my own path, and I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. Streaming had always been a part of my life, but it wasn't until I started sharing my story alongside my gameplay that it became a source of connection and validation. The online community welcomed me with open arms, showing more appreciation for my skills and efforts than my family ever had. Every comment, every follower felt like a small victory, reminding me that I wasn't alone in the world. My streams gained traction, and people began to notice my passion and dedication. It was liberating to see my work recognized. The community even rallied around me when I shared snippets of my story, not for pity, but to inspire others who might feel trapped in their own toxic situations. They cheered me on, and for the first time, I felt like my efforts truly mattered. Meanwhile, things at home didn't seem to be going so well. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that my parents were struggling financially. The endless expenses for Melissa's lifestyle, designer clothes, trips, and social events, were catching up to them. It seemed their priorities were finally taking a toll. I'd be lying if I said I felt any sympathy. They had made their choices, and now they were living with the consequences. Melissa, unsurprisingly, continued her charade on social media, projecting an image of perfection. The posts didn't bother me anymore. They felt like a hollow performance, a desperate attempt to maintain an illusion of control. I didn't follow her, but occasionally, snippets would pop up in conversations or through friends. Instead of resentment, all I felt now was indifference. Her life, like my parents', no longer had any hold over me. One day, I ran into an old family friend, someone who'd always seemed to understand me better than most. We talked about my decision to leave and how I was doing on my own. Hearing their perspective was a revelation. They told me how proud they were of my courage to break away, to prioritize my well-being over the chaos at home. It was the validation I didn't realize I'd been craving. Their words reinforced what I already knew: leaving was the best decision I'd ever made. With time, my life began to settle into a new normal. I built a routine that revolved around my passions and goals. I started saving money, investing in better equipment, and even exploring new hobbies. My apartment, once a symbol of escape, had become a home, a place where I felt safe and free to be myself. Reflecting on everything, I realized how much I'd learned from the experience. The most important lesson was to value myself and my efforts, no matter what others thought. I'd spent too long seeking approval from people who couldn't see my worth. Now, I understood that my validation had to come from within. The journey wasn't easy, but it was worth every challenge. I'd found my voice, my independence, and a community that celebrated me for who I was. For anyone feeling trapped in a toxic environment, my advice is simple: take the leap. It's terrifying, but the freedom on the other side is worth it. You're stronger than you think, and you deserve a life where your efforts and passions are valued. As I powered down Titan one night, I felt a sense of peace I'd never known before. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I had everything I needed to build a future on my terms, and that was more than enough.